Good afternoon. Today is November 19th, 2025, and I'm going to call to order this public listening session of the Charter Review Commission. I think I'll start by introducing the members of our commission. We have some that are here in person today. We have others that are online virtually. I am the chair, Jim Michaels. Our other members in alphabetical order are Sarah Andrew Wilson, Sherry Brett Major, Howard Dennis, Alicia Figueroa, Marvin Lynch, David Knoxheim, Jeffrey Naftal, Michael Persch, Dylan Pressman, and Jorge Quintana. On October 30th, this commission issued a notice informing the public that we would hold two listening sessions today. One this afternoon here in person in the council chambers, and one this evening at 7 p.m. There will be virtual online via Zoom. As for the subject matter, it's a topic that our commissioners have been studying for quite some time. With the assistance of county staff, both from the council and from the executive's office, who are experts in the area of government finance here. And as a best practice, we all know that governments have to maintain some sort of adequate reserve funds to cover potential risks, the risks of a shortfall in revenue or the risk of unanticipated expenses beyond what the budget planned for. And we have currently we have two main sources for reserve funds in the county. We have the unappropriated surplus of funds that remains in the county's general fund that's unspent each year. And then we have reserves that the county actually creates by making financial contributions to what's known as the Revenue Stabilization Fund, which is a fund that the council created by legislation a number of years ago. Currently, however, the charter specifies no target at all for the minimum amount of reserve funds. And some people think that's something that we should look seriously about changing. We do have a minimum amount that the council has specified by enacting legislation and adopting a written policy. So we do have, the council is diligently providing for reserve funds through its legislative mechanism and through the adopted written policy it has. And so together, the written policy and legislation does set a target for minimum reserves, which the county does meet, which the council meets, in fact, has exceeded. And we have a method for meeting that target by making annual contributions to the reserve funds. But the charter itself only specifies a maximum amount that can be in the surplus and doesn't set a minimum. So the question arises as to whether we ought to change the charter to recognize what's currently in legislation and in the county's policy to write into the charter that minimum required reserve amount. And I think the question that arises is, if we have a county policy and if we have legislation and it's in the county code now, why would you change the charter? And I think the obvious question is putting something in the charter, it's putting it in the county's constitution, ensures that it's there indefinitely until the voters approve a change, right? If there were extenuating circumstances and the council decided to change its by legislation or by policy, what it's currently doing, it can do that now. And with a charter change, it would be required to go to get voter approval before it made those changes. So that would be the principal difference in enacting a provision into the charter as opposed to continuing the way we're currently operating. We have one person who's appeared here to speak before us today. I will let him introduce himself in a minute. My understanding is he is here representing our East County Citizens Advisory Board, which we appreciate greatly. We have reached out to all of our actually 5 regional directors and citizens advisory boards to make sure they were aware of what the commission has on its agenda. And East County Citizens Advisory Board has sent us a representative today. So I will let him introduce himself and we will proceed, and go right ahead.
Thank you. Good afternoon. Thank you, Chair Michaels and members of the commission. My name is Radwan Chowdhury. I do have the privilege of serving as a chair of East County Citizen Advisory Board. However, I want to make it clear I'm here as a citizen of this great county, not as a representative of the East County Citizen Advisory Board, because I didn't go through the official procedure. I do support, personally, strongly recommend that the charter be revised to address budget reserves. We need to secure long-term fiscal discipline that benefits all regions of the county, especially the East County, since I'm a resident of this county and raising my children. Mandatory minimum reserves. I think the first charter must establish a mandatory minimum reserve requirement. The problem, currently the 10% target is based on legislation that means the simple legislative majority under temporary fiscal reserve could weaken or repeal the target, jeopardizing the financial stability of the county. The solution would be elevating the 10% threshold charter to make a voter protected, as Chair you mentioned. It ensures financial stability and a core mandate guaranteeing that the county is prepared for major economic downfall, unforeseen emergencies, and stabilize the critical Montgomery County residents who needs reliable, sustainable funding for the capital projects and local services, especially on the capital improvements. On the second point, a restrictive access protocol. The problem we have, without clear charter level criteria, reserve leagues become default funding source to fill annual budget gap. And the possible solution would be the charter should require a supermajority vote, 7 or 8 council members to vote on it, to appropriate reserve funds. And only under explicitly defined emergency conditions, this increased temporary and accountability, providing the public with assurance that their financial safety net is being guaranteed and used only when absolutely necessary. In conclusion, I support revision across all 3 areas. We urge the commissions to recommend charter amendments that replace mutable legislation with permanent and institutionalized fiscal procedures for the benefit of the Montgomery County residents. Thank you.
Thank you. At this time, I will allow any commissioners who want to ask any questions to do so. Do we have any commissioners with questions?
Thank you for your testimony. That's great. So your recommendation is that we do put forth a recommendation to have a minimum amount. And did you say you recommend that amount? Did you have a percentage in mind?
I do not have a specific percentage. I think that will be the preview of this very council, but I do recommend increasing and protection of the.
And would you recommend that percentage that if we were to recommend a percentage in the charter, match what's currently practiced in policy, or exceed, or be higher or lower?
Right, higher amount.
Okay, thank you. Appreciate that.
Absolutely.
If I could ask a question, if I'm on. In terms of the percentage, would you base that percentage on the actual revenue of the fiscal year or on the budget of the fiscal year?
I would recommend it based on the budget, not the actual revenue that is collected, based on proposed budget, I would say.
Okay. Do you have any ideas of the type of criteria you would recommend be implemented to make decisions on whether to use the reserves or not?
At this point, I do not. I do not have any specific criteria or recommendations, perhaps.
Okay. Would that be something you would feel comfortable letting the council define by legislation as opposed to being in actual charter language?
Yes, with given adequate public hearing so other people can weigh into the process, yes.
Okay. Thank you for your helpful testimony. Thank you.
Thank you so much.
Do we have any of our members who are attending virtually with any questions? Okay, apparently not. All right. Since we have no other witnesses appearing here to testify, let me just say that for members of the public who are viewing this hearing either on Zoom after the fact or video recording, the public still has an opportunity to submit written comments at any time. We've got a email address posted on the commission's webpage, and you can send comments also by postal mail. That address is also on our public webpage. We will be continuing to study this topic through the rest of the year and probably into the first couple of months of next year before this commission sort of takes it up as a formal matter to make a decision and recommendation by formal vote as to what to submit to the council in our report, which is due to be submitted around April 30th. That being the case, we have no one else wishing to speak. We will call this public session adjourned. Thank you.